As you saw earlier, the Urban Violent Crime Report has unveiled some distressing data for a few East Coast communities. Our guest tonight is Dave Snow. He's an associate professor in the Department of Political Science at the University of Guelph and a senior fellow at the MacDonald-Laurier Institute and a New Brunswicker at that. And Dave, welcome. We're going to drill down a bit on the maritime communities in a second, but overall, your report has seen a jump right across the country.
Yeah, absolutely. And I should say, first of all, thank you for having me on. But in terms of that jump, we really see it when we look at changes in violent crime rates across the last decade. So we looked at 20 of the largest census metropolitan areas in Canada using Statistics Canada data, the 18 largest, as well as Moncton and St. John's, to get more regional perspectives in there. And on things like violent crime and violent crime severity, we see over the last decade the rates up in 19 or 20 of the CMAs and up by disturbing percentages in some of the smaller cities that we might not necessarily associate with violent crime, both within Atlantic Canada and outside as well.
Yeah, I think a lot of folks who live in what you classify as small to mid-sized cities like to think, well, that's a problem for the most part for the bigger cities, the Torontos, the Montreals, the Vancouvers, Winnipeg. But you mentioned it. You've certainly seen a rise in Halifax, St. John's, Newfoundland. Moncton might be a bit surprising.
Yeah. And some of the surprising things of the 20 census metropolitan areas that we look at, Moncton actually had the highest overall violent crime rate, and I believe the 5th highest violent crime severity, which is an index Statistics Canada uses that, the higher you are, the more severe your violent crime. Halifax and St. John's in particular, across many of the categories of crime we looked at, like aggravated assault, sexual assault, and robbery, not only experienced higher rates of crime relative to the other large and medium-sized Canadian cities, but higher rates of crime over time. So, for example, Moncton saw an increase in its sexual assault rate of 94% over the last decade. So those sorts of statistics in particular are really troubling to see. And I admit, as someone born and raised in Atlantic Canada, surprising to see.
That's a nearly 100% increase in Moncton in sexual violence.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and we're seeing, I just sort of to add that the sexual assault, the sexual violence rates up across the board, again, in every Canadian CMA and up, not 2%, not 3%, but often in the double digits and sometimes higher.
And you're not looking at necessarily what the cause here, but rather the numbers in particular, but, you can make a lot of assumptions by perhaps what might be behind some of these increases.
Yeah, absolutely. And with each particular crime, and I should say that we're looking at Statistics Canada police reported data. So these are what they call criminal incidents. So it's not necessarily something that ends up with a conviction, but this is what we usually use for crime data. For each particular crime, there can be different causes. So some have been quick to say that for sexual assault, for example, greater awareness since the Me Too movement, greater police focus on prosecuting sexual assault might be explaining some level of increase, but certainly at the rates we're seeing and informal conversations with people such as Crown prosecutors, there doesn't seem to be any question that the rate of actual sexual assault has increased considerably, and that the last decade is that time horizon is where we're seeing it in particular.
And could it be possibly even higher? We know there is some reluctance for victims to come forward.
Yeah, absolutely. In any category of crime where there's less chance of reporting to police, when you're looking at data that is reliant on police recorded crime, you're going to see lower numbers. So with sexual assault in particular, probably the lowest reported crime, then those numbers are almost certainly understating the level of criminal incidents that's happening compared to something like homicide, where we would think most homicides are reported to police regardless of whether a conviction occurs. Something like sexual assault, police reported crime data tends to understate the actual severity of the problem.
So much is being made by politicians about things like bail reform, harsher sentences, but there's still some who will dismiss it as fear-mongering. Clearly, the numbers would say otherwise.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I think that what we do in this report is we say, here's the data. Here's 10 years of data, but going back 12 years because we use rolling averages to smooth out, and so we don't let spikes in individual years influence the outcomes. But we say, here's the data, and you can decide what you'd like to do with it. It's unquestionable that over the last decade, we've seen considerable increases in violent crime across Canada's largest cities. It's also unquestionable that that has leveled off in a number of crimes in a number of areas in the last year or so. It's too early to tell if that's a trend, but that it's leveling off at a rate that's much higher than it used to be. And so different perspectives, people can say, okay, this means we need to invest more in community organizations, we need to invest more in the root causes of crime. Others might say we need to invest more in police services, we need to have tougher violent sentences for violent offenders. We're not saying in this report what we ought to do. We're saying these are the data, they're unquestionable. Yeah. We know that violent crime is increasing, so let others have a conversation about what to do with these numbers.
Dave Snow, it certainly will begin a conversation, no doubt. Thank you very much. Dave Snow of Fredericton, but in southwestern Ontario this evening. Thanks again. Appreciate your time.
Thank you for having me.
We'll be back with much more of your local news after this.